I'm Mark Ryan, this is Super Review, and this is the new IO Volare. And if you've never heard of IO before, well, that's because they are a brand new brand, and this is their first IM. They're coming out the gates with what they're calling a flagship IM, and I think there's a lot of things about this thing on paper that are certainly flagship. One, the price is not cheap, it's around 600 bucks, but for that you get an IM that is a tribrid. It's actually packed with 9 drivers. I forget, I think it's 4 balanced armatures, 4 ESTs, and of course, dynamic driver for the bass. And yeah, I don't know, it's interesting and kind of exciting every time that there is a new brand on the market, especially one that's coming out with something that is kind of competitively priced. I know 600 bucks doesn't sound cheap, but for an IM that has 4 ESTs, there's not, I don't know, 600 bucks honestly is pretty competitive. That said, I don't know, after living with this thing for a couple of weeks, my initial thoughts are that this is actually a pretty decent sounding IM, but it's also kind of a little bit tedious for me to review because it's kind of a little bit of an old sound. We'll get into that. So I guess before we get into it, a quick shout out to Shenzhen Audio, by the way, for sending this guy in for review. If you want to check out the Volare, anything else they've got, I've got it linked down below. But yeah, let's just talk about the Volare, what it's like to listen to. I'll compare it with a couple of other IMs, and I'll give you my overall take on this guy. But to start with, I'm going to show you kind of the most impressive part of the Volare, if I'm honest. And it's actually this packaging, which I know it doesn't sound the most exciting, but look at this. This is a cube box that the Volare comes in. It's got a nice magnetic lid that pops up over the top. That's not necessarily super standout, but here's what's kind of cool. It's actually got these little drawers built into it. So you get your cable comes out in a drawer, and they've actually got swappable terminations. So they have them all laid out here. You have 2.5 mil balanced, 4.4 balanced, or 3.5 mil single-ended if you're basic like me. They've also got an entire drawer dedicated to ear tips. And I don't know, can you see how many stinking ear tips there are in there? I think, what is there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different styles of ear tips. It's a lot of stinking ear tips. And they are all subtly different. I'll be honest, I didn't spend a ton of time rolling them all because the stock ones actually ended up working out pretty well. And then down here, you've got a third drawer with another tip, another cable termination, and some paperwork. Paperwork, not that exciting. But this box itself, honestly, that's pretty cool. You know, I've seen boxes similar to this. There's like the Sony Z1R has similar packaging. That's like a $2,000 IEM. The Volare, only 600 bucks. So I don't know, kind of a steal in that way. This was also in the box. This was a carry case. I pulled it out because it was too pretty to keep inside the box, but yeah, a nice little carry case. Obviously, again, bigger than I typically like, but this is, you know, this is something like you would put out and display. Leave this in your living room. People come in, talk to you about it. It's kind of nice. I gotta be honest. I'll give it to them. On the accessories, I guess on the topic of the accessories, I'll talk about the build quality on the IM itself real quick, and this cable, which I really like actually. So it is a black braided cable. Kind of seems, you know, fairly run-of-the-mill and basic, but the behavior on it is just really, really quite nice. It's got a fairly small Y-split, a very functional chin slider, which I like to see. And then it's got handsome ear hooks up here, which terminate in your natural, your common 0.78 millimeter 2-pin connectors. Okay. The other thing that's interesting about this cable, and I kind of alluded to it a bit when I was doing the unboxing or showing you what's inside the box, is that these are swappable. Am I going to be able to? Yeah. So you basically screw off the back here, and the mechanism is actually really nice because it ends up still being pretty small, and then you pull this thing out. There you go. I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to get back together. But a lot of these swappable terminations I don't like because they just kind of add a lot of unnecessary bulk. But this one ends up with a connector that is really not any larger than your average 3.5 mil connector. And I dig that. And then the rest of the cable is just, I don't know, again, the behavior is really nice on it. It's like a little extra supple, but it's not overly thick like a lot of really nice cables are. So this is just a really nice balance. And I dig it. Now, that will take us up to talking about the earpieces here. And if you caught the note that I made earlier about this thing having a lot of drivers in it, it's got 9 drivers per ear. As you might expect, it's a little bit on the large side. That said, I think they've done a pretty good job with the shape. It definitely feels large in the ear, and I'll give you a demo of that in a little bit. But I guess while we're up here up close, I'll just focus on the aesthetics, I suppose, which has got this interesting glitter pattern to the plastic shell. That much I don't hate. This outer pattern, however, I don't know, it's a little weird. It's a little like kind of muscly and sinewy, and I'm not exactly sure what motif they're going for. And if I'm perfectly honest, like I like the glossiness to it, but there's not much depth to it. It looks okay. I'll say that I think aesthetically this IM is okay. The cable I think is fantastic. The IM itself it's okay. But yeah, I guess that will lead us into talking about the fit. Let me throw these things in my ear while I describe how comfortably they fit, which they are generally pretty comfortable, despite being quite large. As you can see, it fills up my ear quite well, but also is not really sticking out especially far, which is kind of impressive for an IM of this size. They've just done a good job with the shape, slotting into the folds of at least my ear. It works really well for me. I would say that fit stability ends up not feeling the most stable, the most secure, even though in practical experience, I really haven't had an issue with it. Like it almost just kind of feels like a little bit wedge shaped in my ear. So it almost feels like it's trying to my ear's trying to squeeze it out. But there is enough of a little catch here on the antitragus little bit, this little nubbin right here. Why do I always reach here? Something to do with hand-eye coordination. But anyway, this little bit ends up catching just enough of it to actually hold it in place. So again, apart from it being a little bit on the large side, generally pretty comfortable and surprisingly actually pretty secure. So that is the physical form factor on this guy, but we got to talk about the sound. And that's where, again, I find this IM a little bit on the tedious side. And maybe this is definitely my bias for sure. But the tuning on this guy is kind of basic, all right? In the thumbnail, I've probably described this thing as a new brand, old sound. And that is kind of exactly how I feel about it. So let me pull up the frequency response. I should have had this arranged earlier, but here you go. If you want to check it out, I've got it linked down below on squig.link. But this is a frequency response here of the IO Volare. And it looks like a pretty well done frequency response. It's just kind of like a traditional, mild, tasteful V-shaped sound signature, a little bit more exaggerated than your average. So I don't know, it kind of reminds me of listening to the Moondrop Aria, all right? Moondrop Aria, a very nice, well-balanced IM that you can get for 80 bucks. The Volare is a very nice, well-balanced tune that you can get for 600 bucks. And now I will say that it's not exactly like listening to a Moondrop Aria. It does have smoother treble, kind of a more filled out treble. And the bass in this guy is actually surprisingly sturdy. It's not necessarily super sharp and snappy in the attack, but it's got this nice sturdy punch behind it. So if you're listening to things with kick drums and stuff like that, classic rock, stuff like that, it's going to sound pretty satisfying and fun. Even if maybe the sub bass rumble isn't the most textured on this guy. But mostly I think what just kind of lets it down for me is that it's just kind of middle of the road. Technical performance I think is fine. Imaging is fine. At 600 bucks, I don't think it's super competitive. And then the tonal balance is, again, this might be a tonal balance that in a couple of years, I will remember this fondly. This will be sort of a nostalgic thing. But at this point, it does kind of seem like, and again, maybe this is my bias, it does kind of seem like the meta is moving on past this particular frequency response. It feels like the meta is moving on to something that's a little bit more mid-range, tuned with maybe a more sub-bass focused tune, and not that everything needs to sound like that. I don't want to give that impression, but just when I heard the Volare for the first time, I was like, okay, that sounds familiar. It sounds decent, but I'm not super excited to listen to it. Now, just a couple of quick comparisons. These are a couple of other IMs at around 600 bucks that I do feel more excited about. And I guess I'll bring them in just to kind of talk about why. And they're not necessarily better in whatever ways are important to you, but for me, I like both of these IMs better. So here we've got the Symphonium Meteor, and then here we've got the High Senior Megafest, or Mega 5 EST, which I've recently reviewed. What can I say? Okay, so the tuning on this guy, the Meteor, it is a little bit on the esoteric side, I'll be honest. If you plug this thing in your ears, at least for me, it definitely immediately sounds less natural than both of these IMs, okay? And that could be definitely a dig against it. But I think this is the kind of IM that the more I listen to it, my ears just kind of adjust to it. And what it does really well is atmosphere. And it's just, again, it's kind of like special and unique in that way. It's not necessarily the most technical. It's certainly not the closest to my target frequency response, but it's like this esoteric, interesting, unique tune that you listen to it and you're like, wow, this actually works really well. And it becomes addicting in a way that the Volare, while arguably this is better tuned, like it's more traditionally tuned and probably going to sound more natural to more people, it also just kind of comes across a little bit, again, a little on the tedious side, I find. Whereas the Megafest here, all right, this is more neutral. This is more my jam in terms of tonal balance, right? A little bit more mid-range focus than what you're going to get here on the Volare. Less contrasty, but it's maybe similar levels of bass. Now, this one's definitely going to come across as the bassier guy. If you're looking for the bassier IM of these two, the Volare is definitely it, but I would say that the Meteor is also the bassier set and just kind of a lot more interesting for my ear. Technical performance between these two, I'd say, is probably similar, but if you recall from my review of the Megafest, I said the technical performance is fine. Not super standout. I think that's also true here of the Volare. The big difference is that I much prefer the tuning here on the Megafest. So the Volare ends up being an IM that is certainly inoffensive. The treble is not sharp, it's not sibilant, it's not untoward. It's maybe a little bit hot in the vocals region, but I don't know. It's a perfectly tasteful, satisfying listen, I suppose. It's just also kind of uninteresting, and that's kind of where I land on the Volare. $600, tribrid. Again, they're packing a lot of drivers. If you're looking for the most bang for your buck in terms of like the cost of materials, maybe this might be it. But if you're looking for the most interesting sound, for me, that's not it. The Volare, I'm going to give it 3 stars. If you want to check it out, like I mentioned, I've got it linked in the description down below. And while you're down there, if you haven't already, please do hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, ding the YouTube bell, and I'll catch you on the next super review. Cheers.
Join with the force of reviews. We now have the tools to brave the misleading world of audio fools. Hey, this review is super, and so are you. Grab your headphones, sniff a graph, and share your thoughts in this pursuit. Let's get into the future.